I'm Mel.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Bec, and this is We Are Woman. There's a version of womanhood many of us learned very early in life. The good girl, the one who is polite, responsible, helpful, the one who doesn't cause too much trouble, the one who works hard, does the right thing, and tries very carefully not to get anything wrong. For many of us, being the good girl meant being liked, being safe, and being accepted. So we learned to be capable, dependable, and accommodating. We learned to smooth things over, to carry the weight, to make sure everything runs well for everyone else. But somewhere along the way, that identity can quietly become a pressure to be perfect, to never inconvenience anyone, and to never make mistakes. And while many of us grow up believing that being good is simply the right way to live, over time we start to notice the cost. The exhaustion of holding everything together, the pressure of getting everything right, the quiet habit of putting everyone else first. So today, Mel and I are exploring that pattern, the good girl archetype, the pressure to be perfect, the role of people pleasing, and what it might look like to soften some of those expectations we've been carrying for so long. Because maybe the goal isn't to stop caring or stop being responsible. Maybe the real work is learning how to be human again. So, welcome, Mel. I love that we're having this conversation together because in our episodes so far, I think something that we've established pretty well is that you and I have both run these patterns of being the good girl for many, many years of our lives. So it feels really nice to be having this conversation with you. And I guess for me, I'm really interested in understanding because you have spent so long running these patterns, what did it mean to be a good girl in your world when you were younger?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bec. I'm excited for this episode today. To unpack this with you. To start off with, I think being a good girl in my world meant being responsible, not causing too much trouble, and always getting things right. It meant, how to be aware of how others were feeling and adjusting myself around that. And I think it also meant not being too much, not too loud, not too emotional, and not too difficult. Yeah, when I think about it, being a good girl in my world basically just meant being easy, easy to be around, easy to manage, easy to love. I think I learned pretty quickly that being that version of myself was what kept things smooth and
Mm,
kept connection. I'm not really quite sure where I learnt that. I know it meant being a good girl meant staying in certain lines. No one explicitly said what those lines were, but I think you just kind of learn them, through conditioning,
mm,
and that was a big part of it. Never getting it wrong, and I think basically underneath all of that, it was just about being someone who's easy to be around and not creating too much disruption. And then, therefore, that leading to being accepted, I think. Yeah. And
yeah.
as I said, I don't know if anyone ever directly said it to me. It was just that being good was what kept everything okay.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really feel you as you're describing that. And I think I really resonate with the idea of it being the good girl keeps everything really simple, really safe,
Mm,
really easy. And growing up in my household, there was, I mean, we've talked about my past before, but there was a lot of stuff, and
mm,
so being the good girl meant being quiet as well,
mm.
and almost not seen. And if I'm not seen, then I can't get hurt to an extent.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you described, no one really expressed that explicitly, that this was the way to be. But just that pattern became rewarded for me because if I was silent and I was unassuming, then I was rewarded by everything just being quite smooth and easy
Mm,
for me, whereas other people were not so silent, not so unassuming, and things were a little bit harder for them to an extent as well. So there was a reward that came with being the good girl. Did you notice that?
yeah, definitely. Definitely. The reward. And look, yeah, I think at the end of the day, the good girl could be on behalf of, yeah, the connection and the belonging. It's a strategy, right? It's a strategy and a pattern. I know that it still can play out for me now. There's still a good girl here who wants to get everything right and be responsible and capable and not make too many mistakes and not let anyone down and read the room. It's still all there. It still plays out now, probably just differently now that I'm older.
Mm.
And there is still reward in that in certain contexts. There is still being liked. There is still being accepted or belonging or just feeling safe. Yeah, there's definitely rewards, even now.
Yeah, I really love that you described belonging because when we talk about these patterns, they're strategies, right? And I
Mm,
really see the good girl being more of a belonging strategy than anything else. And
mm,
that's really important because it's biologically wired in us to look for places we belong. So, of course, we create strategies that protect that. And what can often happen is this dichotomy, I think, with a strategy like the good girl strategy, where it's not who we are, it's what we do. But
mm.
over time of using it and being rewarded for it, even in this unconscious way, it can start to feel like this is who we are. And then we start to wear that as one of our hats, right? Or our identities. I am the good girl. And then
Mm.
that does become an identity and it does become who we are, not what we do. And it becomes hard to separate the good girl because I just thought that was who I was, right? So it becomes more than a behavior, it really becomes that identity.
It does become an identity, Beck, and it's funny that you bring that piece into it because I had this situation recently happen at work and it really showed me how strong that pattern and identity is still in me. And look, it sounds like such a small thing, but it revealed so much. And I realized at work I had made a mistake. It's quite minor. I'd priced some invoices incorrectly. It wasn't the end of the world, it was just a human error. But
Mm.
the reaction I had internally was huge. I noticed how deeply I still hold this belief that I can't make mistakes and I can't impact other people negatively. And if I do, that somehow I have let people down. And it
Mm.
made me realize how much pressure this comes to carry this identity and to be this person who is perfect or never makes mistakes or completely capable or super
Yeah.
superhuman or something,
Mm.
when you're when you're a human and you're trying not to be one, the pressure
Mm.
becomes unbearable. And I think so many women may be able to relate to that and think that in this instance if they make a mistake they're failing, but what if they're actually confronting the identity of the woman who is always right, or even that good girl, if we relate back to our childhood. But what if it is, yeah, that confrontation of the identity of
Mm,
always having it right? And that's exactly what happened to me at work recently. And it's just an example that, yeah, I totally
mm.
agree. Identity, we start being, we are that person, we are the good girl, we are
Yeah.
that capable person. And that's where the pressure comes in.
Yeah, and you can see why so many women try to navigate this idea of authenticity and who am I and bringing my whole self to the work I do, then step into leadership roles and yeah, we can almost move too far into letting go of our personality and just being the
Mm,
leader and almost
yeah.
moving into aggression rather than authority because it's like a little bit risky, isn't it, to make mistakes when stakes are so high. I know the example you said, oh, wasn't high stakes, but in leadership, I think everything can feel high stakes at times
Mm,
because people are looking up to us as leaders in an organization. And so if we make a mistake, it can feel like a slight on us rather than just something we did, particularly if we wear these personalities such as I'm the good girl, and perfectionism is often related to the good girl personality as well. So you can see why people go so far the other side in situations where they might be leading teams as well, because there's so much pressure we put on ourselves to always be getting it right. And sometimes it's easier to put those suits of armor up to protect ourselves
mm.
rather than having to face that we're actually just humans.
Yeah, and I resonate with everything you're saying, Beck, and it brings up for me here this idea of permission. Can we actually give ourselves permission to be anything other than
Mm,
that good girl or anything other than perfect or the most competent leader? Like
mm,
questions I quite often sit with recently are, can I, and I think we've spoken to this in episodes, but am I allowed to be messy? Am I allowed to be imperfect? I think for a long time I've equated with this goodness, being the good girl and being perfect with also being my value. So therefore, if I am not perfect and I don't lead the room well, or if I made mistakes, then therefore I'm not valued. And yeah, it brings back to that pressure and it's actually really hard.
so interesting that you describe that because sometimes I still notice what happens in my system when I'm interacting with people I don't know very well or I'm creating these new friendships. What I still notice is that doubts play out around conversations I might have or interactions. And I think if we think about where these strategies come from, and we talked about this being a belonging strategy, it's also a safety strategy, right?
For
And
sure.
so our nervous system shapes around, checking for safety. And I still have this pattern that comes up of, did I say the right thing? Do they like
Mm.
me? Did was I interesting enough? Was I funny enough? Am I too boring? Oh my God, what if I mention this person and they don't like this person? Whatever it is, did I say something too controversial? Right? I have this that is just so ingrained in me that I have to really catch myself and witness myself running these patterns or running these trains of thought as they come up and actively let them go because as you said they just sort of creep up on you and it's just all of this stuff from our conditioning and our years and years of doing it and when we do that as well being kind to ourselves when we notice that
Mm.
they are coming up. Yet that does come up for me. and I'm okay. It's all right. I see you there. I see what you're doing, and I don't really need you right now. I'm okay to not know if this person thought that what I said was too controversial or not.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's really important to have compassion both for yourself in those moments, Beck, and then also for this good girl pattern, as if she's sort of a part of you that's separate. I think it's, the good girl part of us, or the good girl pattern, she's not there to be malicious. She was there, as you said, for belonging and safety, and it's a strategy for survival. And there is goodness in what we can offer from that good girl part. So I know we can go into that after this, but yeah, having compassion for both the part and yourself in that moment. And I wonder, as you were sharing your experiences around that, um, and I wonder if this is what's coming up for you. Do you think in that there's a people pleasing pattern as well? In the did I make anybody uncomfortable? Did I anticipate everybody's needs? Did I smooth the tension in the
Mm.
conversation? Is there people pleasing a part of this good girl?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right.
Mm.
And I think about people pleasing, and I think again, it's something we do that we often drop part of ourselves or
Mm.
hide part of ourselves to enable the other person to feel good. So, for example, if I'm at a friend's house and we're having a conversation about, world politics, and I walk away and I think, oh, what if, what were they thinking? But often I'm really holding things back in order to make sure that everything's really smooth. And what I've really noticed recently is people pleasing typically comes from the fear underneath, right? So
Mm.
the action, what I need to understand is what's the fear underneath that. And that becomes the work. And the work for me is I people please because my fear is that if people see the real me, they won't like the real me.
Mm.
So I then wear this good girl mask of always compliant, always doing the right thing, and then and people pleasing and just saying what everyone wants to hear because that's easier than having to sit in the fear of I've just put the real me on show and
Yes.
yeah, they might not like that, which is okay because we're not liked by everyone, and that's okay too. But it's very hard to tell your unconscious that sometimes.
Yeah, and I think what a really interesting question in all of this is, how do we actually know when we're people pleasing? Or even more honestly, like you just spoke to before, how do we know when we're abandoning ourselves a little bit? Because I think sometimes it's not always obvious in the moment, but it can look like saying yes when you wanted to say no. Or as you said, going along with something just to keep the peace, and or even just not saying what you really think. And sometimes it's not even in what we're doing. You can also feel that in your body, a tightening
Mm,
somewhere or a holding back, or even, in mind, that little voice that says, this doesn't feel quite right, but we override it anyway. And I
yeah.
think that's where that self abandonment piece can often come in. And it's just, yeah, I think that self abandonment often just feels like that quiet override.
Mm,
And a big one for me here, and I don't know if you find this too, Beck, but over explaining myself. Have you
mm,
ever become conscious of how many times you over explain yourself, like you need to be understood, or you feel responsible for how someone else feels, so you're
mm.
trying to over explain yourself or justify yourself, or even maybe justify your existence, which goes back to not taking up too much space. And then you probably leave that conversation thinking, oh, why did I even say that? Like all of those signs.
Yeah. Do you know what? This is going to sound like such a suck up, but in all honesty, having friends like you has really taught me to, yeah, embrace owning those parts of me more.
Oh, I
Just
love this.
example, yeah. Just as examples, when we share our needs and our boundaries, I don't know about you. I think we've had conversations recently where both of us have shared our needs,
Mm.
and I have definitely over-explained at those times my needs. And I've even afterwards felt horrible shame, guilt, whatever the
Mm.
words were of, oh my God, I can't believe I just said all of that. And then afterwards, I'm always met with just such a level of kindness and understanding. So yeah, really honoring you in that
Oh, thank you, Beck.
having really good friendships is really teaching me to, because you guys honor my boundaries in a way
Mm.
that I haven't. So you're teaching me to honor my boundaries in a way that is stronger and more empowered than I previously have. And I really love that because, yeah, that over explaining is definitely a tendency.
Yes, let's catch more of that. And I love that you bring that in, Beck. And I think it speaks to why we do this podcast here too, to for us to share our stories, but to also find women who think the same way and can support each other and not judge each other and bringing back compassion into all of this too and not judging ourselves as well. You know, these behaviors, the over explaining, like for most of us, that was learnt for a reason and it did keep us connected and it did keep us safe. So,
Mm,
not judging others, but then also not judging ourselves as well, again.
yeah, and I think I want to also maybe share with our listeners. It's not like, it's not that Mel and I and our friendship groups live in a place of constantly psychoanalyzing each other either. It's that we,
It's true.
okay, maybe we do. No, we actually don't.
We don't.
But,
No, we do not.
but I think there's a level of a few things. There's a level of trust, honesty, integrity, and deep reverence for each other that
Mm,
we want to support each other and hold each other accountable for the things that are important to us. So, for example, I think, as I said recently, both of us have been talking about what works for us, what doesn't work for us, sort of
mm,
some boundaries that are really important. And I think we've both been able to support each other to go, yeah, actually you're right, that is my boundary and I'm
mm.
good with that being my boundary. And so it's not that we're talking in psychotherapy speak, we're just allowing more of each other within
Yeah.
those relationships as well. So you don't have to you don't have to be going up to your friend and saying, hey, how's that boundary? That's not how we talk to each other either. But it's just, yeah, you've told me that before that that doesn't work for you. I'm happy to work around that or whatever that looks like. And the women in your life being able to communicate that that's okay. Because for women who run patterns of people pleasing, and the good girl, that doesn't feel okay. And that
Mm.
hasn't felt okay. And so that can feel really scary. So when we do support other women by saying that's okay, it's allowing and giving a permission that maybe hasn't previously been there.
Yeah, I love that you bring that in because I think it almost goes full circle back to why these good girl patterns are there in the beginning, which is that belonging and acceptance. So to be able to have spaces and people where you don't have to perform a certain version of yourself and be you, but still fully belong as yourself. And you're right, it's not to find spaces where we're all psychoanalyzing each other. It just sits in a place where you don't have to get it right all the time. And that links back to, yeah, that belonging and acceptance. I think many of us have experienced and been in environments where we did feel like we had to be the good girl. And so we obviously learnt to adapt to that, sorry. But then there's something really powerful about being around women who let you be human or who aren't expecting perfection or who aren't needing you to be anything other than you are in that moment. And I think
Mm.
that's what's really important. And that's what's healing. We don't realize how much we've been performing until we're in a space where we don't have to. And similarly to our friendships that we've found, Beck, and with Sarah, it's like conversations like this, podcasts like this, spaces and breath work, it can all feel so different because
Mm.
there's a permission to soften instead of perform, I suppose.
Something I'm really interested in, and Mel, you and I are both mothers, but I see the good girl pattern coming up for me in the way I parent. And
Mm,
at times, my expectations for Hazel, and I really have to remember and maybe embrace something I'm teaching myself, is really embracing that she doesn't wear the good girl. And I
yes, I
actually
love
really
this.
love that about her, right? Before we were recording this podcast, I am wearing a bracelet that she made, and I'm also wearing a bracelet that has some words of wisdom from my aunt. And I was looking down at these bracelets and I thought, wow, these are the two most unapologetically fierce women in my
Mm,
life. They were and don't wear the good girl at all. And I, as a mum, my my want for Hazel to feel good and be safe at all times. Sometimes I have to remember to put a back seat on that or rein that in and allow her not to feel good and
mm,
to do things that challenge her. If she's always safe and swaddled, then she's not going to grow either. And the good girl piece has been quite challenging for me in that area because I want people to love her, right? The way I love
mm,
her. And she talks back, or she's abrupt or direct, and she tells people exactly what she needs. And as a younger mum, and when she was younger, my fear was always like, oh my God, Hazel, t tone that down. You've got to be kind. Da,
mm,
da, 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 da. Da. And she doesn't wear that. That's not her. It's not to say she's rude. She's not at all. She can be so beautiful and so kind and so thoughtful. But she also is so clear, which I, as a little 6-year-old, amazes me. So clear on her needs and so clear on her boundaries as well, and what she's prepared to tolerate. So that's been such a learning for me to witness someone that doesn't wear that. And I'll be honest, I found that really uncomfortable for a long time, and I've really leaning into the learning I have from her. So yes, I probably talked around in a circle there, but I guess giving that example, as a mum yourself and as someone that does wear that, what do you notice about, yeah, parenting in this space of wanting to be the good girl?
Yeah, honestly, Beck, I loved that you shared that and thank you for going into it. And I think it's really beautiful just to have that reflection that you notice that you want people to like your daughter because it happens here too. I think as parents, it's easy to feel like our kids are a reflection of us, and in a way they are. And in my experience, I love, like, if I could just summarize sort of what you spoke to is very similar to what plays out here. I do think it's about awareness, noticing where we subtly might reinforce the good girl. I have a son as well, so I can even say, while I say good girl, I can say good kid or good children. Um, but just those, praising them for being quiet or easy or not causing trouble. And those things aren't wrong in themselves, but I think it's important that they're not the only things that we value. And my big thing for my daughter and my son is that I want them to feel safe in all the parts of themselves. So I really try hard not to, and I'm very conscious not to ever put down the parts that there are anything other than easy. So, not the loud parts or the messy parts or the emotional parts. I want them to know that they can love those parts too. I don't want to have probably what was more my experience, where if it wasn't an easy part, then it wasn't a good part. So
Mm.
just, push that aside. They're not good. I can't have that. And also, if I have those parts, then I'm not lovable. Yeah, just that awareness piece around that. And one of the biggest things I'm realizing is our example. They don't just learn from what we say to them. I'm really conscious of what they're watching me do and how I am
Mm.
with myself. And if I don't give myself permission to be imperfect or messy, or I show in front of them that I'm really upset about a mistake and it has more to do with my value and my identity and my self-worth than anything else. I think that's important because they're always watching us too.
Mm.
I think that would be my biggest insights. And I love that there's this sort of two-layered approach to the fact that we can bring our good girl to the way we parent. Like, I want to be a good parent and I want my kids to look good, so then I look good, but then we also reinforce that good girl onto
Mm.
them, or that good child onto them. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting dynamic to explore this one through.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I really love that you described just recognizing and modeling that behavior as well. And I don't know if it's because we have Hazel, my daughter, and she doesn't have any brothers or sisters. I hate using the word only child because only feels less than, and she is
Mm.
absolutely not less than.
No, she is
So
not.
I don't know what the right word is. I heard someone describe, say, single child the other day, and that didn't sit with me either. So I'm not
Mm.
not quite there on the language. If anyone does have good language, message me on that so I can use it. Because she's often in conversation with adults, sometimes I think, wow, I forget she's only 6 and these conversations we're having. But yesterday we were talking about it because I picked her up from school and we were off to do something nice. It was just the two of us last night because my husband was away. And she was obviously a little bit tired from school and got a little bit angry and stroppy at, I don't know, something that didn't go her way. And then she had a tennis lesson. So she had a tennis lesson and we came back and we talked about it. And I sort of said, imagine you had spent the whole day getting excited about doing something nice for me. And then imagine you told me, and then, this was the reaction I gave you. How might you feel about that? And we were having a conversation about that. And she said, Mum, do I really have to still be talking about this now? And so, well, you, you had your tennis lesson, so we couldn't talk about it earlier. But also, there are times that you go to school, and when you come home, I will say to you, would love to talk about what happened this morning. Mummy did the wrong thing. This is what I did. This is what I could have done better. And I just wanted to apologize for you. And I said the reason why I do that is because it's important for you to see that I can see that in myself and recognize the impact that has on you. And you might have played all day and had the best day and completely forgotten about it, but it'll still be there at some point in some place. And it's important for us to close the loop on that, even if it's a few hours later. And it feels really good for me to model that behavior to you even when I have to apologize for my own behavior that way. So yeah, we do have to have this conversation now, even though you don't really want to. It probably sounds like I'm floating off into space sharing that, but I think the reason why I share that is what you said as well, our modeling of that
Mm.
behavior as a parent as well, and recognizing these moments in ourselves and how they come up, and the patterns that we're reflecting onto our kids and the expectations we have of them because of our patterns. All
Mm.
of that happens constantly in real time. And as a parent, it's so tricky because we're recognizing it in ourselves, and we're also there's this added level of pressure to not
Yes.
put it on our kids. So yeah, just explaining this situation that happened with my daughter yesterday, but also really demonstrating that this is such a constant work for me, as it is for all women, all parents, all dads as well, I think.
Yeah, honestly, Beck, thank you so much for that. That was a beautiful exploration, and I love that. You can also show Hazel, and this can happen in relationships other than parenting too, right? But for the younger generation to be watching, my mum can embrace her potentially, messy parts or whatever, not these easy parts, whatever we want to call them, and watching you embrace them, own them, apologize for them, but also not berate yourself about them or not bring in that judgment. And I think
Mm,
that's what's really important, and it's why we have to remember, yeah, bringing that compassion and no judgment for even the good girl or for our parts that are seemingly not part of this good girl persona. And I think when I listen to your stories about Hazel, your daughter, I get so excited because do you know what it ignites in me? That little rebel part that wants to rebel against all of this good girl conditioning. And I'm by
yeah.
no means suggesting that Hazel is a rebel and
She
she's on a
is.
mission to go against.
I love that.
Well, great. Yes, because it just sounds so playful and so fierce and so strong, because I think when we're bringing in this narrative around the good girl pattern, we also have to bring in that other part that can come up, the rebel who just wants
Mm,
nothing to do with being the good girl anymore. And look, I'm not suggesting that Hazel's never a good girl, but listening to her stories brings that up in me. And I have that part. I have that rebel who is so sick of being the good girl, who now just doesn't care if it's perfect, doesn't care if everyone's happy, and I'm just doing it this way because I don't have to follow the rules.
mm,
And are they even real? Are the rules even real? And do we have to be doing this? And I'm tired and I'm not doing it anymore. And
yeah.
I think that's a really big part. And look, the rebel feels sometimes if I don't go too much into it, like too much into the swaying down to the pendulum of the rebel, it can be healthy to be in the middle. I'm just not overthinking. I'm not fixing everything. I'm not managing everyone. And it's a complete distinction, difference from the good girl who's like, let's get everything right and be perfect. And then this rebel is in me. And it's like, what if we just don't? And
Mm.
I'm curious, Beck, your thoughts on this rebel who seemingly feels, I guess, the opposite of the good girl, and is there an in between there? Have you experienced the rebel?
Yeah, I really love that you described that. And I think with kids, it can feel very all or nothing one way or the other because
Mm,
they're not yet developed in sort of the finer nuances of things, right? But as adults, I think we can be more that sort of beautiful, happy, integrated medium as well. I
yeah.
think sometimes rebellion, if we've been running these patterns of always being the good girl or feeling like we have to always be the good girl, then what rebellion can bring is a sense of freedom in our system as well.
Mm,
Like we're really free from the shackles of the have to do things a certain way. And it can feel really powerful in our system as well to be that rebel. If you are listening and you do run these patterns, you might think about where you rebel. The thing that came up for me is I most rebel against the ones I love. So if my husband's like,
it's so true.
please don't do this, there's a little part of me that wants to do that.
Yes.
So sorry, sorry to him. He's my training ground, but it was just a really funny thing that came up for me. So the rebellion can feel really powerful. I think the challenge is when rebellion itself doesn't feel like a choice, where
Yeah.
it feels like we have to be the good girl, and if we're not the good girl, we're the rebel. And so, what I really like that you described is this place of integrating both into this
Mm,
really beautiful middle piece there, where we can come from a place of maybe more rebellion, more freedom, more flow, but we're not going right to the other end and saying no to everything. There's still a choice there of, yeah, I want to, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to say yes to this person, or you know what, I actually don't want to this time. And I think because we talked about the good girl being a belonging strategy, what I think occurs is as we get better at being a little bit rebellious and finding our way into the middle, we start to get safer around our relationships. We start to feel safer in terms of that more authentic version of us and that real belonging as well. And so we find that we don't have to work so hard to feel loved. And because we don't have to work so hard to feel loved, we can sort of sit more in the middle rather than feeling like, well, if I'm not doing this, I have to do this and go all the way out into rebellion. Rebellion can be fun though, and I was trying to think about my my rebellion and earlier and what are some of the fun things that I've done in rebellion. But yeah, I think for me, I've come more into the middle now. So I was really struggling to think of where I'm the most cheeky, most rebellious these days. What about you?
Oh, I love this part. Yeah, firstly would love to yeah, echo what you've been speaking to in terms of, yeah, can we land at a healthier version between these two parts? I think for me, um, the the rebel, or it almost used to feel like I had to choose between the rebel or the good girl,
Mm,
and there was no in between. And I love that you bring up that yeah, the integration is just finding that middle place. For me, I know the rebel almost was exiling the good girl and couldn't, just was like, we are not doing any of that anymore. And I think that it's important to yeah, to register that the goal isn't either compliance with the good girl or complete rebellion. It's
mm,
that integration. And I love the idea of keeping those qualities that we value of the good girl, but just coming from a healthier place while we do it. Caring can exist without people pleasing.
yeah.
Responsibility can exist without perfectionism. A big one for me, being helpful can exist without feeling obligated to help, like I
Mm,
have to help. So we can still bring in those beautiful qualities if we so wish to choose to. The freedom is ours, but coming from that healthier place.
yeah.
But also circling back to my rebellious parts, I completely agree. My rebellion has been more so with those I love, and particularly my husband, than anyone else. And he'll be listening to this episode, either laughing or rolling his eyes, depending on what day it is, what day we've had. But I will say, yeah, I think it's a big wake up call when you realize, and this has been my experience when you realize that, or I realized I have been living my life from that people pleasing and that perfectionism and obligation out of rather really being true to myself.
Mm,
So there have been areas where the rebel has felt quite uncomfortable and quite painful to be sitting with, but then also it's been necessary to be able to experience that and come back to that
mm.
middle ground whereby I can now make decisions and not in aversion to the good girl and not in aversion to the rebel, but just where truly am in the moment and just having that freedom of choice.
Yeah, beautiful. We love cat videos in our family for a little bit of a laugh. And I don't know if you've ever seen those cat videos where there's like a cat sitting up on a table with like a crystal bowl and the cat parent says, "Don't do it, don't
Oh,
do it."
yeah.
And then the cat just slides the bowl over and it gets smashed. That is what goes on in my head when my husband says, "Don't do it, don't do it." And I can just see myself sliding the crystal bowl. So I think it's funny. I think the rebellion for me is an internal feeling more than
Mm,
an action. And I really see this as such an important point for our listeners as well, is that when we're saying, how do you move away from the good girl as an identity, as who I am, to this is a pattern I'm running and this is a pattern I'm choosing whether or not I'm now running. The shifts aren't so dramatic. It's not that we're going from always doing things really well to doing things really poorly. And I say this to my clients often who run patterns of perfectionism. It's not within you to do it really terribly. So you can take the pressure off yourself around, if I don't focus all my attention on doing this perfectly, I'm going to do it poorly, because you know within yourself you're not going to always want to be doing things poorly. And I think as you and we've run those patterns, I couldn't see that in you
Mm,
either, right?
yeah, agree.
So, so they're not going to be massive dramatic shifts, but some of the language that we've spoken about today as well around the idea of freedom and choice, and it's going to feel more of a choice, and it's going to be, yeah, that more internal experience of being able to stay with myself in those moments. So when someone asks me, can I do this? And really, I don't have capacity. So I need to tell my manager that I don't have capacity, or I'm not in a place that I'm able to do that, or I can't support here with my partner for whatever reason, that we can stay within ourselves and really speak from that place. And I think that's so different from expecting when we do look to maybe allow these parts of ourselves to take a little bit of a back seat to allow other parts to come forward. That doesn't change us because that wasn't our identity, even though it felt like it. So the changes aren't going to be hugely dramatic in that way, but we will feel them. And going back to what you described earlier, Mel, our nervous system will feel it. We will feel it in our body. It will feel more expansive rather than constricting. And yeah, again, if we're really struggling to be playful with that, sometimes some of our practices, like somatic practices or breath work, can be a really I was going to say playful playground, and to explore that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really beautiful time now to bring in that nervous system space because yeah, as we've been speaking to this, it's important and it's a realization that's coming up here as I'm speaking to it. It's not just beliefs and identity. As we know, this also actually lives in the body. These
Mm,
patterns and these beliefs and this identity, they show up in the body. And it's, in moments when I feel like I've gotten it wrong, it's not just a thought. I feel it. And
mm,
our listeners may resonate with this too, and you too, Beck, but there'll be a tension and my jaw tightens, my
mm,
chest feels heavy, my whole system can be showing the pattern of I need to fix this or I
mm.
need to remain perfect. And
Yeah,
yeah, that good girl pattern isn't just in the mind, it's a nervous system pattern as well, which is why we work with the nervous system when we find this such a beautiful modality to explore these things because while the body is trying to stay safe by getting everything right, that jaw tension or that short breath is something we can then go into the nervous system with and just expand gently or just have a little subtle shift or let go of that somehow. And then the body can experience that difference in
mm,
pattern in terms of you don't have to get it right and you can still be connected or accepted or okay. And yeah, I think it's awesome that you bring in the nervous system here at this point because all of this stuff lives there too, right?
yeah, yeah, beautiful. And I love that description of being able to experience and being with it. I know you've just done NLP qualification, so speaking to language as well, what I think perfectionism and good girl patterns for me. they are really away from patterns. And
Mm.
what I mean by that is I run those patterns because I want to get away from feeling judged or wrong or less than or shame. And what has been really beautiful for me is exploring them through breath work, because what I've noticed is I've been able to explore what it's like to move towards freedom, authenticity, belonging, all parts of me welcome, and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, just to sort of use that lens around language as well. I think what's beautiful is we can take our cognitive thoughts and mind offline in order to then come back and cognitively make sense of it using modalities like, yeah, we love FBR breath work for that, but certainly some of these more somatic practices or hypnotherapy can be fantastic for that as well, where you just allow that thinking brain to go offline a little bit and just to allow yourself to really experience what does that look like? How do I make sense of that from really deep within myself as well?
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing that in, Beck. There's so many, yeah, beautiful parts to both the FBR breath work we do and then the other modalities that we bring in, and specifically me with the NLP. I think it's the combination, and I know we've spoken to this before, but of the mind and the body, and knowing when to come in, which was probably what we've been exploring for most part of this episode, and exploring beliefs and identities, and almost being able to separate ourselves from that pattern. I am not the good girl. That pattern runs here, but that is not my identity. Or I have these beliefs, but I can change them, and being able to do that. And then from here, we end up going down into our more nervous system, body based practices like FBR, whereby we can ask that to all step aside and then explore it through the body as well, and then harmonize all that and just have, yeah, a sort of more holistic view of the picture. And I think it's so important with patterns like this that a lot of us are running that good girl pattern. How is it in mind being represented, and then how is it in the body being represented? And it's such a powerful space to be in, to be able to do both.
Yeah, beautiful. And Mel, I think that's such a wonderful inquiry for our listeners as well, is to maybe go away and ask those questions of
Mm.
themselves. What are the thoughts that come up? What are the thoughts that come up when I say no to something? What are the fears that might be behind the pattern of perfectionism, for example, and really start to draw out those thoughts? And then again, what are the feelings? So I gave the example of maybe walking away from a conversation and then thinking, oh my God, what if I said the wrong thing? That's a thought, but what's the feeling that goes with that? And just seeing if we can track that in our body as a really good starting position. And then on the opposite side of that, what does it feel like in those moments where I'm so myself, where I'm so in flow? How does that feel different? And then obviously you can work with people like ourselves, or you can do the work yourself as well to close the gap between the two. But I think as you brought that in, that's such a beautiful place for us to maybe give our listeners something to explore.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's also important, as we're leaning into all this, to remember that while we're exploring the meanings and the identities and the beliefs, and then tying that all together, just remembering that this pattern isn't something we need to get rid of as well. She she's a part of us. I'm referring to her like she's a an actual person. But yeah, that pattern, it's a part of us, and it helped us learn how to belong and how to be accepted and how to stay safe. And for a long time it worked. So just a reminder on that compassion piece. Um, and then really wanting to circle back to the fact that what I think is one of the other things to sit with, in that our listeners could just start noticing what pressure comes with all of that as well, the
Mhm.
needing to get it right, or to not making mistakes, or not to negatively impact anyone, how exhausting that can be. And that can show up in mind and in the body. And how is that feeling every day when you do that? And then likewise, how does it feel, as you said, when you can drop that and then that freedom comes in? And
Mm,
and then noticing, maybe the work isn't choosing between the two. It's just learning how to hold both for now. Or just
mm.
noticing when one's online and when the other is either the rebel, the good girl, or just sort of being able to hold it all. And yeah, just finding those parts and just loving it all. They're there
Mm.
for a reason, and we're all just here trying to, yeah, yeah, find a healthier, more truer place to come from.
I work with Clifton Strengths, and what we talk about in strengths is we often look through the lens of strengths or weaknesses. And
Mm,
the more useful lens to look through is our strengths, how we play them well, and how we might overplay them. And I think it's recognizing, as you said, Mel, that these patterns have been really useful for us. They've kept us safe. They've helped us get that sense of belonging, as you described.
mm,
How might we be overplaying them, and how can we play them in a way that might be more useful, and learn to identify when one thing's more useful than the other. And it's like picking the right tool for the job, right? This
mm.
particular pattern can be useful at times. It's not always useful. Something else might be useful at times as well. And so, yeah, as you described, the more we get to know them and understand them and have compassion and gratitude for all of it,
Mm.
all even the messy stuff, the more we can play it well, so to speak.
One of my questions, I think, as I sit here, and I wonder what it like. We spoke to it before, but I wonder for our listeners, what does it look like to actually move from that good girl into a more integrated version of ourselves? And I think we can go back to speaking to just catching those moments of over explaining or saying yes when we mean no and things like that. I'm wondering, Beck, where do you think this would show up most in everyday for women? Where could they look for this stuff?
Yes, so great question. It shows up in relationship, right? So
Mm,
where can we notice ourselves not being ourselves in relationship? Maybe I really notice it in work when I'm talking to my boss. Maybe I notice it when I'm in the schoolyard and I'm interacting with other mums. Maybe I notice it with my partner or
mm,
some of my loved ones, and just noticing where in relationship this shows up. And again, where in relationship there might be more ease and flow. And again, noticing the difference, noticing it in our thoughts, seeing it in our body as well. I really like what you said, Mel. This is an exploration. It's an opportunity to explore without judgment. We're just really being the
mm.
witness. So yeah, I think that's a really great tool or opportunity for our listeners to take away and come into exploring this for themselves as the witness.
Yeah, I love that. And I think what becomes possible when I think about that is that when I think about myself, no longer having to get everything right or do things perfectly or never make mistakes, because that was what was playing out for me a couple of weeks ago. It just really feels like an expansion. It
Mm,
feels like I can feel in my body already, even as I speak to it, it's just a softening
mm,
and everything feels better and my breath is easier and my chest is more open, and even just sort of anchoring that state and then bringing that into to every day. I think that's the potential of this work and this
mm,
inquiry and this whole episode. Like, what becomes possible is that feeling, and I know we mentioned it before, it's that freedom, but to me also what comes in mind is that expansion and
mm.
then the potential of that, and allowing that in others as well, allowing myself just to not be that good girl anymore, and then hopefully others giving themselves the permission to do that same thing actually.
Yeah, I love that. What a gift to be able to feel that expansion and that, yeah, real flow and the openness of the energy of of getting to know what it's like to bring in all of our parts and to drop,
Mm.
yeah, those hats that we wear when we don't necessarily need them. So, yeah, thank you so much, Mel.
Yeah, I love that. I love where we've gone with this episode today, Beck. We've gone, from that good girl into the rebel and then into sort of more that integrated, healthier space. And I think those three spaces are where we can all sit in from here with our exploration and through those great tools and tips that you spoke to just earlier, just exploring those three
Mm.
spaces.
Yeah.
And yeah, going about it that way, and that's the whole point of our podcast here, right? We really love starting these topics and then creating a helpful exploration to be able to go through,
Mm.
and hopefully that our listeners actually can sort of flow through themselves and discover things about themselves. And this is such a beautiful topic to go through.
Yes, so true. If you are listening and then the listening stops, but you're driving in your car and you're still thinking about it an hour later in your own exploration, then that's the goal for us. That is why we're here, and really hoping that that stirs something in you. Thank you for joining us. And Mel, thank you so much. I love this conversation. Who better to have a conversation about the good girl with than the two of us, right?
So true. I absolutely love this, Beck. Thank you.
If this conversation resonates with you, it might be an invitation to gently notice where the good girl still lives in your life. Where do you feel the pressure to get everything right? Where do you carry a responsibility that might not fully belong to you? Where are you still trying to earn approval by being perfect, helpful, or agreeable? And maybe instead of trying to eliminate that part, you can simply meet her with a little bit more compassion. Because the good girl was never trying to harm you, she was trying to keep you safe. But perhaps now, as adults, we can loosen the rules she's been living by. Maybe we can still care deeply and still show up and do our best, and also allow ourselves to be human, to make mistakes, to learn and to soften, and to discover that our worth was never dependent on being perfect in the first place.
So that's all from us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to We Are Woman. I hope today's conversation gave you something to reflect on, to feel into, or to carry with you into the rest of your week. Please make sure to click subscribe on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss the latest episodes as they drop. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a woman that would find it helpful, because this isn't just our podcast, it's all of ours together. You can also follow us on Instagram at We Are Woman Podcast to stay connected, share your thoughts, and join our growing sisterhood. We've got some very special events planned and would love for you to be a part of them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being exactly who you are.